Good morning.
Morning.
Deval, thank you for joining us.
I'm glad to be here. Thank you.
Wonderful to have you here.
Look at your crowd. Wow.
Early start to the day. Very impressive.
Except down in front, just like in classroom.
Just like in class. Yes, exactly. So, Bain Capital was really the first institutional private equity firm to launch an impact investing fund. And can you talk a little bit about the challenges of being first in this space?
So I got interested in this field in my old job through a marvelous pioneer named Sir Ronald Cohen, who was coming through the states introducing sitting governors and mayors to social impact bonds. And we got jazzed about that idea and did two of the first in the country in Massachusetts. And Ronnie and I had stayed in touch, and he'd gone on to found Bridges Ventures in the UK, which is an earlier stage impact fund, as you may know. And they were getting returns at that point, very competitive with regular way private equity. And I said, I want to do that. It turns out that Bain Capital was interested in getting into that space around the time I was coming out of office. And I had friends there who said, why don't you come and help us figure it out? So we spent a year mapping the field, talking to everybody, trying to understand where a firm of our kind could, with the skill set of Bain Capital, could contribute to help building the field and where there was white space. And so we landed where we have, which is a later stage, lower middle market, we buyout. It's sort of ridiculous to use those terms because, in fact, in most cases, these are founders who are with whom we are partnering. But we take control positions mainly in North America in three specific verticals, which I can come back to. But the long way around to your question is that we were very conscious of being humble entrants to the field, because a whole lot of folks have been doing this work in a whole variety of ways for a long time.
Right. Smaller firms.
Smaller firms, usually venture, or more often than not, venture another early stage. Yeah. Less North America focused, as we are, more emerging markets, and there's a lot to learn there. But we wanted to be contributors to building the field, not sort of a Bigfoot entrant. And we wanted to fill a white space that wasn't really addressed, which is how a great concept that is impactful scales. And that's not just about capital. It's also about insight and partnership and support.
I want to come back to this issue of scale in a minute, but you mentioned you were intrigued when you met Sir Cohen about the idea you could get returns. And yet, certainly in the early days of this sector, investors, the LPs who put capital to work, they were always saying, well, they were skeptical that you could actually get returns and have impact. Could you really do this together?
We got that.
Do you still find that? Is that
it's interesting. It's changing. And there are lots of proof points. By the way, there have been for a while. Yeah. But I remember when we raised the first fund, there were a lot of, kind of raised eyebrows or eye rolls. We chose if you think of a spectrum of returns for impact investing, we chose the competitive or commercial PE sort of point on that spectrum, not as a value judgment for where others are, but really for two reasons. One is that the sorts of investors who invest in Bain Capital products expect a competitive rate of return. But frankly, I think, and this was my motivation, being able to demonstrate at scale that you don't have to trade return for impact poses some really important and I think unavoidable questions for regular way investing.
Such as?
Well, if you are intentional about Let me back up. I think, frankly, in a time of ubiquitous information, you can say you're managing to the financial bottom line alone, but if you ignore the environmental or the human bottom line, it'll come around to bite your financial bottom line. And so, in my view, it's not a big step from there to impact investing, which is about being intentional about those other bottom lines. Now, we chose our thematic verticals: sustainability, health and wellness, and education and workforce development. I would say 20% by personal interest, but 80% analysis about where we thought there were companies in which we could invest in the lower middle market where we could get a financial return. I think that the interest, really thanks to all of you and folks you know, and a generation that's coming along saying, look, we need to think in fresh ways about what long-term value is. I think the interest from LPs is exploding, and I think that's a very, very exciting thing.
Would it be too much to say that impact investing is not just a better way of investing for society, but simply a better way of investing, period?
Well, I think that's true. I don't know that it is. It's universally accepted, but I think there's some helpful signs.
What would some of those signs be?
I mean, Larry Fink's letter a couple of years ago to his. This is Larry Fink from BlackRock. You probably all know. It's
world's largest asset manager
in the world. I think.
In the world, yeah.
And he wrote to his investors and to the general public that it was time to consider stakeholders beyond shareholders. They are important, but there are also other stakeholders. All investing has impact, and it's an acknowledgement of that. The Business Roundtable statement.
That's right. Just a summary.
Recently, what people do remains to be seen. But I think these things are connected. There's a different way emerging to think about capitalism. Mm-hmm. In some ways, it's a return to the future. Because there's some, for the scholars here, there is plenty of evidence that the corporate charter was never intended to be solely about shareholders. But I think it is also for a fiduciary who's considering investing in the kind of work that we do and the kind of product we offer. It's important to show that you don't have to compromise. You may choose to do so, and there are other products that enable you those opportunities, the strategies, but you don't have to. And I think that's, as I say, an enormously important point to make.
Right, terrific.
Because we've tried to enter the field with humility, we have a lot of allies in the field, and so being able to raise their profile and the consideration of impact investing is not some niche style of investing, but just another flavor out there. I think has been helpful. It's not all helpful, at least at the outset. I think there were some very mission-oriented entrepreneurs, founders, who were a little concerned about, so many people's view of Bain Capital was formed by the 2012 presidential campaign. I was co-chair of that campaign, so I'm very familiar with all that. So, some of it is kind of working through those kinds of initial impressions that you sometimes have. But I told my colleagues once, and it shocked them, that dealing with skepticism is no big thing or no new thing for a black man in America. So I'm kind of used to, having to surmount first impressions.
Overcome those impressions. Yeah, terrific. Good for you. You use the word quaint, which is not a term you hear a lot in the financial industry, right?
Yeah.
This is, but actually, there's a serious catch-22 here, isn't there? Because the seriously big investors, say CalPERS and New York State Common, they are so large that they can only write very large checks.
That's right.
And if a fund is relatively small, they literally can't participate. And that creates a catch-22. I think we're getting beyond that now.
Yeah, they can, but they don't. Meaning they have so much capital to deploy that trying to, doing the work for a $30 million investment is the same as doing the work for the $300 million investment. Right. So they might as well, they say, do the $300 million investment. By the way, that wasn't true of every one of our investors. There were those who said, we're going to do something smaller because it's the space we want to be in. Yeah. But it's interesting because Bain Capital's interest in impact investing before I got there came from several LPs, mainly in Europe, where the field is more mature, as you may know, who had said, when are you going to have one of these? And so after that year of homework, we said, okay, we've got a business plan. And we went to see those LPs. And they said, that's exactly what we want. Here's $200 million. And we said, well, man, that's too big for what we're trying to do. Right. Our target initially was 250. And they said, well, come back and see us when you can take a check that size for exactly the reasons that your question got to.
That catch-22. Yeah. So let's come back to, you mentioned your three sectors you focused on. And I'm interested to know, really I have two questions. One is why those sectors? And two, the follow-on question is, how's that working out in terms of social impact? And that's a very challenging question because, of course, these things are hard to measure. You meant, as you alluded to, minorities in this country have many challenges. Do these type of funds help address some of those challenges? Are there other social issues that you think are getting addressed more quickly? Mm-hmm. So I'd like to get to the social element first, but why did you pick those three sectors?
So I mentioned that those three sectors were 20% personal interest. I would say we started with personal interest, things I had experienced in my old job as governor, particularly coming through the recession, or frankly in my life. Mm. But we excluded some things that are highly impactful. I'll explain that by sustainability, we're interested in sustainable agriculture. We're interested in alternative energy and energy efficiency. We're interested in urban agriculture. We looked at all those subsectors. In health and wellness, we've looked at strategies, products, and services that are about reducing costs and improving access for marginalized communities, or wellness, consumer goods and services. And then education and workforce development is about tools that enable people to have an on-ramp to economic mobility. Mm-hmm. We invested, for example, in a company called Penn Foster, which is a low-cost online upskilling platform. Very accessible. You can do it at your own pace to really address this huge middle skills gap, which I first confronted really sort of came and slapped me in the face in my old job when during the recession in Massachusetts, at our worst, we had about 175,000 people out of work and 125,000 vacancies. And what the employers were telling us is that they couldn't find people with the skills they needed for the jobs they had. And many of those jobs were so-called middle skills jobs. So you needed more than a high school diploma, but not necessarily a college degree. You needed a certification or some targeted set of skills. And the way the training dollars available through much of government comes down from the federal government are incredibly inflexible in being able to target people for particular skills, for particular jobs. So that's been on my heart for some while. And we found this wonderful company, Penn Foster, which is a platform for that. We're trying to build that out. And it maybe gives me an opportunity to use that as an example for measurement, which I think is
which is a very hot topic at the moment.
It is a hot topic.
It's a hard topic,
and it's
right?
hard. It's hard. I think it's not impossible. There's much more data. There are many more tools to use. In that 1 year of homework I told you about before we launched, the feedback we got from many LPs and others who have been doing this work is, don't go invent a unique measurement tool, which is so interesting because I thought we're going to create the industry standard. It's going to be the Bain Capital Impact Index or something like that. Folks said, nah, don't do that. We get that there's no gap accounting yet for impact, but if you use something in general usage, at least we'll be able to compare your performance on impact with other impact funds. So we looked at a bunch of, GIN has a marvelous tool. We settled on the GEARS survey or the B impact analysis out of B Labs, right? And the value of that is that you can measure each company against it. We set as a goal, a minimum goal of getting over the 80 grade, which is when you are eligible to be certified a B corporation. And you can roll it up so you can get a fund-wide score.
Yeah.
But we also have custom metrics for each company, because we want to reflect our progress against the impact thesis for investing in the first place.
Yeah.
So in the case of Penn Foster, we're obviously measuring number of students who enroll and complete. We want to get the completion rate up. But we're now doing longitudinal work to really evaluate whether the students' income and career trajectory changed as a result of that study. And it's early days, but we'll get there. And frankly, that brings me to a third point around measurement in this too long answer, which is how do you assure that impact is sustained after your whole period?
Yeah,
how do you get mission lock? And I think there's a whole lot of innovation happening in the field around that.
Okay, good. And one thing I want to touch on in terms of the sectors you're in, you're only in the U.S.
Only in North America.
Only North America, correction, thank you. What are your thoughts on the opportunity for impact investing in developing countries, in the sense that in some ways a dollar invested in a developing country can have greater impact, greater number of lives, though the financial return can be tremendously challenging. Is that something that's been considered at Bain Capital? Is that just not in your area of
we
focus?
thought about that. We thought about that a lot. I've lived and done business in Africa. I've done business in Latin America. We're very interested in those markets. We chose North America at the outset for a couple of reasons. One is that it was a new team. We wanted the team to function as a team, and we want the skill set to be built in that team so that each of the members is steeped both in financial analysis and in impact analysis, so that we didn't have one group that was just focused on impact and another group that was kind of conventional PE. We want everybody to have the whole skill set. And so being together was important. Because it's just, the phone is great. Technology is terrific, but being together
the human
really helps to
interaction
make the team turn into a team, and that's how we work. But also, we have infant mortality rates in my old neighborhood in south side of Chicago, just like emerging markets. Yeah. So there are ways in which there's so much unfinished business right here. So I think this was a good place for us to start. And I really do mean North America. We've looked hard at a number of opportunities in Mexico and in Canada. In both of those cases, in the sustainable agriculture space, we've looked really, really hard at fishing, which is a messed up supply chain, if ever there was one. You can catch a tuna not too far from here, and before it gets to your sushi plate, if it gets to your sushi plate, it has been to Japan and for auction and China for processing. It's just, it's nuts.
That's a lot of greenhouse gases.
That's a lot of greenhouse gases, right.
So your career path is unusual in the financial sector. You're in the corporate world, tremendously successful in the political world as governor of Massachusetts, and now in the financial world. How did that career path actually contribute to your ability to run the fund? I think all that experience would come together in a interesting way.
Some of my team members are not yet convinced it does, but I remind them I founded the thing and I hired them, so they'll come around.
They usually do.
There are maybe two kinds of answers. When I was maybe 15 or 16 years old, I was home on a school vacation, and I was on my way to meet somebody. I was late, and I went hustling down the way to get a bus, and I got to the bus stop just as the city bus pulled up in Chicago, and I jumped on, and they still had coin boxes then, so I reached in my pocket and I had my coins, and I realized only after the bus was moving that I didn't have enough money for the fare. And I'm standing there looking ridiculous, and there was this old black guy who, I say old, he's probably then the age I am now, but he was a old black guy with this sort of salt and pepper beard. Yeah, see what I mean? Who looked at me looking ridiculous and pointed to the seat closest to the door, and he said, "Sit down, son," like that. And I knew I was going to get it. And I started to explain I was been away, and I was late, and I wasn't paying attention, and so on. And he turned for just a second from the road, and he sort of sized me up the way people who serve the public can do that in a second. And he turned back to driving, and he just said, "Pass it on, son. Just pass it on." And it was just such an act of grace, and it had an impact on me about how to be a man, how to. I've had incredible blessings. I remember once when I was introduced as governor by Doug Wilder, who had been the first African-American elected governor. He was governor of Virginia. And he talked about my being first in Massachusetts. And it was the most wonderful thing. He said, being first doesn't mean a thing unless there's a second. It's what you leave behind. And I have tried to have that as a through line for all my work. And so in the private sector, in the public sector, in philanthropy, where I have also worked, you notice that there are all kinds of challenges we face where, frankly, the business community has been on the sidelines for a little too long. And the scope and scale of our challenges is such, we frankly need everybody on the field doing what they can. I think the other thing I would just say in terms of my disproportionate self-confidence, and I add to that humility for this reason. Between college and law school, I spent a year in Africa on something called a Rockefeller Fellowship. And the one requirement of the fellowship is that you spend that year in a non-Western culture. And they give you enough money to get there and get home. So there would not be anything left over for you to kind of move into the local 4-star, 5-star hotel and just wait out the year. And I wanted to go to Africa. I'd never traveled anywhere outside the United States before. I wanted to go to Africa. I wrote to everybody I knew who knew someone in Africa. 30, 40 letters. And I got one reply from one guy in Khartoum, Sudan, who said, "Come. I understand what you want to do. I don't know what we have, but we'll figure it out when you get here." And so I set off with a backpack. We don't do this on the south side of Chicago, by the way, but a backpack and my what I thought I needed for that year. I taught myself the greetings and the numbers in Arabic on the flight from Athens to Cairo, and then I hitchhiked from Cairo to Khartoum, which took it's about 1,200 miles.
I was going to say, that's not close.
Yes. That's another thing we don't do on the south side of Chicago. And it took about 3 weeks, and the last 10 days was, without a bath. I looked like a piece of the desert I just come through. I found the office of the guy I've been writing to, and I learned when I got there that he had left the week before for 2 years in Long Beach, California. And he'd said nothing about my coming or what I was supposed to do. And just to truncate this, basically, ultimately, they sent me to Darfur. This is a long time ago, so Darfur was different then. But there was no mail, no phone service, there were no roads, no rail to get out there, or airport. You had to buy space on top of a cargo lorry, and you're on tracks through the sand for 600 miles. But anyway, I was out there for 6 or 7 months on my own, and I figured it out, right? I figured out, I learned the language, I learned how to make friends, I learned how to do the job, I learned how to feed myself and make friends and so on. And I think when you figure out that you can figure it out, there are a whole lot of things that, should not be on your trajectory that you say, well, yeah, maybe I could do that.
That's terrific advice. Speaking of advice, we're going to switch to Q&A now, but I do have one last question. If people want to come up to the mics with questions for Governor Patrick, please do so. In the spirit of pass it on, any other career advice you would offer anyone in the audience interested in impact investing? And we have certainly here at Columbia, we have a lot of people interested in the sector.
Yeah.
Anything specific you would offer?
It's exploding at all sorts of business schools and elsewhere, which is, I think, really encouraging. First of all, I think if you want to be in a fund like ours, in a firm like ours, and there are more and more of them who've followed us, the typical path is through someplace like this, and or we take folks who've been in investment banking or consulting for a couple of years, and they come in as associates, and then they generally come back to a place like this, and then come on. We are vetting for that sort of traditional skill set, but really some demonstrated interest in and heart for the impact, because we would do a disservice to the field if impact was just marketing, if it wasn't about really trying to get alpha but if you close your eyes, I can sound like a PE guy, get alpha on both the financial or commercial and the impact side. Yeah. So we're trying to screen for.
You're looking for true believers.
Exactly. Or folks whose mind and heart is open enough. They don't have to have it all when they show up. I didn't. But I think also, there, as I say about public service, I think it's also true about this approach to capitalism. There are all kinds of ways to serve. We need really, really good folks who are taking the long view about what long-term value is in big companies and small companies, in junior positions and senior positions. We need entrepreneurs who are thinking about all of their bottom lines when they launch a new enterprise. We need shareholders who are making those demands of the executive teams of the companies in which they invest. So I think there are a lot of ways to make capitalism function. And to, I'd say this as a former policymaker, to grow the economy out, not just up, so that there really is a way for people to get a toehold in the, in the American dream.
I couldn't agree more. Thank you. Thank you for saying that. Questions?
Good morning. Thank you for this wonderful start to what's going to be an excellent program overall. My name is Margaret. I come from the corporate purpose future of capitalism space. My question is, how is the rest of Bain Capital learning from your 20-person team?
It's a great question. Thank you, Margaret. And this is not all about us. I'm not going to take all the credit. If there is, and I think there is some credit, but there's an ESG screen and increasingly reporting done portfolio-wide. That pressure comes in large part from LPs today. And that started with Europe and Australian LPs. Because, I think it's fair to say that thinking is more mature outside the US. This has all exploded in the last few years. So thank you for what you've been doing to keep that going. I'd also say that historically, there are investments in the large cap PE fund that I could point you to that would be indistinguishable except in terms of check size from an impact orientation. And as a firm with a sort of an investing style, which is about business building, not just financial engineering, not just making the balance sheet pretty so you can sell it on to somebody, but actually creating sustainable enterprise. It's not, this is a logical extension of the firm style of investing. I didn't know that when I got there, but it's an awfully good thing to know now that I'm there.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good morning. Thank you so much about your comments about, getting more diverse engagement around these kind of capital projects and enterprises. I'm a social worker, Native American. I'm with Coding to Work, which is a social enterprise, trying to get people into work and out of their bedrooms or wherever they're hanging out. And my question to you...
tell me your first name.
Benjamin.
Benjamin, yeah. Where are you based? Where are you?
We're in Norway.
Okay.
So we have about 50 people that are doing this online training they're all on welfare and they're getting placement in IT companies. And so we're going to try to bring that here as a way to bridge this educational barriers. You can't get into school because you never went. You don't have money. You don't have friends. You may have Asperger's, but you do very well online. Thousands of hours online. So you're a self-taught learner, talent. So I guess my question is, I'm a social worker and I'm always shocked to see that there are very few social workers at these type of events. And do you see a future of more synergy with this kind of 501c3 nonprofit world and social enterprise?
Maybe. I mean, what I observe, having been in sort of the problem-solving business all over the world, in the sectors we've been talking about, is that the collaboration, or that the lines between the private and the public sector and philanthropy are a lot less bright outside the U.S. than they are here. And I think we are learning, and I certainly had this experience in my old job, that there are many, many better solutions you can get from collaboration, from bringing other sectors in, particularly, and actually kind of fun for me personally when you have people at the table who generally don't even talk to each other, and wouldn't undertake to meet on their own. But, most people accept the governor's invitation to come to a meeting. So I think there's a lot to like about, a lot to be hopeful about in as we develop our collaborative gene, if you will, here in the United States. I'd also say I'm intrigued by what you're working on. We invested in a company called Rural Sourcing, which is it's an onshoring IT outsource company. Yeah, I think I have it right. Sure. Basically, it's a company that creates IT outsourcing capacity in communities where the downtown's been hollowed out. We have offices in Mobile, Alabama, Jonesboro, Arkansas, Fort Wayne, Indiana, for example, and we will build them until they're 150, and we move on. And because of the markets where they are, we can pay a really good salary for folks who are doing the coding, some of them coming home from Silicon Valley or Boston, what have you. So a great rate for them. They will train up folks locally, including some folks with the kind of profile you described. And we can charge, the Fortune 50 who are outsourcing their IT work a competitive rate with the folks who offshore their outsourced IT, and also catalyze economic activity in communities that are, a little bit on their heels. So there may be some things we could do together.
I love that. Thank you so much.
Cool. Thank you.
Good morning. Thank you very much for sharing your experience and advice. My name is Lulu. I'm a part-time student, EMPA student. Right now we're doing...
Lulu?
Yeah, Lulu. Right now, we're doing a capstone project with New York Fed on putting together a list of tools for the opportunity zones, especially for local community users.
Yes.
So my question is, do you invest or look to invest in small businesses in opportunity zones? If you do, how do you source the deals? If you don't, why?
One strategy we thought about is there a company we invest in whose headquarters could be moved to an OZ? There's a lot to like about that. You got to be there a long time. And the question about where the revenue of the company comes from, I think, has not been resolved, as you know. The answer is no, we haven't, but we haven't ruled it out. We just haven't figured out what the path is for our fund.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Lou.
Hello, thank you so much for speaking today. My name is Alessandro Ciari. I work with the CUNY School of Public Health.
All right.
And I am developing a incubator that's focused on public health entrepreneurship. And you mentioned one of the sectors that you focus on is looking at products and services that can increase access for marginalized communities.
Yeah.
And one gap that I'm identifying is that there's a pile up in innovation tech, but not necessarily so much of a pile up of systems and services for marginalized communities to access this innovation in tech,
right,
which has perhaps led to even more disparities economically and health-wise around the world. So I'm wondering if you have identified that sort of gap and could expound upon the types of cases that you are interested in when it comes to your healthcare focus.
The answer is, to your first question is yes, kind of. And the answer to the second question is no. But I can give you some examples, or an example of a company we've invested in the health and wellness vertical. I'm smiling to myself, Alessandro, because I remember when I was campaigning the first time, I would go to Cambridge and someone would ask me a question, feels very much like yours, and I did not realize at the beginning that they had already written a book on the subject. You know much more about the question you were asking me about than I do. So, I kind of get it. So you should help me understand the gap. An example of a company we invested in. So we're very interested in pediatric dentistry, dental care, because there are many, many studies that show the connection between oral hygiene in the early years and overall health, and in fact, learning for poor kids. And there are these things called DSOs, it's called Dental Services Organization, I think. Think of them as a chain of dental offices. And there are a bunch of them that have been traded in the private equity space, and we learn about them from bankers and such. But most of them are built on the private pay, on private pay. And we thought, okay, well, let's find one that's at least close to populations we're interested in, and then maybe we can start to steer it that way. And we went in search. In fact, we got actually pretty far down the road on one on the West Coast. And about halfway through diligence, the CEO said, company's for sale, I get that. Your number seems right, we get that. But if this is a strategy you're going to pursue, I just want to tell you I'm out when we close. And we said, maybe this is not for us. So we kept looking. And ultimately, we came to a company called Rodeo Dental in Texas, whose whole model is built on the Medicaid population. And they use data in a very, very creative way to make the most of the time of these families when they come into the stores. We're building to 20 by the end of this year. It's just explosive. Very mission-oriented founders, and we think, as one of them said at the closing dinner, it was not just love at first sight; it was marriage at first sight. So that's a start. But I hear what you're saying. There's a lot of yeastiness in the healthcare space, and a lot of innovation, and not all of it actually about driving system costs down. And until we get at that, I'm not sure we're going to get far enough as a society. I mean.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I think we have about 5 more minutes, maybe just a couple more questions.
Okay.
Good morning. Thanks for being with us.
Good morning.
Name is David Brown. I'm a co-leader of a venture that is improving and reinventing the automotive seatbelt.
All right.
2 of my kids were experienced devastating injuries about 10 years ago in a very low-speed collision.
Oh, David, I'm
and
so sorry.
IIHS, thank you. They're both doing great. 2 in college now.
Wow.
2 of 5. 3 in college. What we recognized, IIHS actually just came out with a study pointing to the deficits especially in the rear seat of the seatbelt's performance, the efficacy. Basically, it's a compromise that the industry hasn't addressed as we save the skull and the spine and sacrifice the chest and the abdomen to do so. And if you look at the opportunities for material science and other advanced sensing technologies, the industry is really migrating to throwing trillions at autonomy and avoiding collisions rather than helping occupants in those collisions. So my question for you relates to your maturity as a practice, wondering if your proof of concept is at a stage where you might venture into the earlier stage investment realm of social impact investing, because it's founders like us in the social impact realm that have the hardest time to attract capital on the one hand, and on the other hand, arguably the insight and value you add in market qualification, vetting market opportunity, and partnership to scale, you could add tremendous value. I'm a former Accenture strategy partner, so I kind of get where some of your wherewithal and capability comes from. So as a founder, boy, we would love to have you.
You know, I'd love to partner with you, David. It's not what we do. I can point you to some folks who do what we do what you need. And it would be great for you to know. I wish we did more in the venture or early stage. And we may come to that one day. We're not there yet.
I can't think of a better way to start the day than with our guest, Governor Patrick. So thank you very much.
Thank you.